Good evening and welcome to the Policy Committee of the Whole. My name is Willa Powell. I'm chairing this meeting. We do have a quorum. We are starting about 11 minutes late because the meeting was originally noticed for 6 o'clock and it took us a little bit to get a quorum. So I hope no one will hold it against me that we're starting late. Because some people would think we're actually starting early if they may wander in at 6 o'clock and wonder why we're already underway. Okay, so as always, I'd like to start the meeting with a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Patterson, seconded by Commissioner Malloy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. There are no speakers on the agenda tonight. So that takes us down to item 3 on the agenda, which is approval of the March 7th minutes of the Policy Committee.
Motion.
I have a motion to approve the minutes,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Adams. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Carries unanimously. Jaime and Shelley, I see that you're both on, both of our state-appointed monitors are on Zoom. So if you have any questions, just like shout it out, okay?
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we do not have any NYSSBA policy recommendations this round. And the Code of Conduct, there are no updates from the ad hoc committee. So that moves us right into new business, which includes 4 policies. Charisma, would you like to take the lead on this?
Yes. Good evening. So this evening, the Policy Committee is bringing forward policies 4513, 5000, 5191, and 5220. So these policies followed the policy roadmap. It started at policy subcommittee and then was sent off to executive cabinet and the parent groups and SOC, our Student Leadership Congress. And there were some questions, so some questions did come back to subcommittee, and they are now in front of you all tonight. These are the folks who were part of contributing to the policy updates. The policy subcommittee met bi-weekly, and now the final recommendations are being forwarded to the policy committee following policy 2410. For library selection policy 4513, NYSSBA, this is a new policy by NYSSBA. Based on the original policy that NYSSBA presented, there are no significant changes that the subcommittee is recommending. Student policy goals 5000. This is also a new policy, and this policy did have some significant changes versus what NYSSBA recommended. So that is more aligned with our district. And I would love to shout out our SOC students who were the ones who came up with the goals for this policy. Students with HIV-related illness policy 5191. So there are some of the language from NYSSBA's policy 0150, which is their HIV policy, was added to include employees. So as a result, it is recommended that the name is changed to individuals with HIV-related illness, and that the policy number becomes 0150 to move it out of the 5,000 students series, since now it would include students and employees. NYSSBA had recommended that as you know, the policies moved to 0150, and that this policy represents policy 5191, but adds in staff as well, and that the board is encouraged to consider this approach. And so the policy committee did take NYSSBA's recommendation. And then the final policy is student publications policy 5220. There are no significant changes being put forward by the policy committee, and NESBA has said that this policy has been updated. So there was like a census update for us on our end, but again, there was no significant changes. And so next steps is that the policies will all actually be forwarded out of the policy committee tonight to go on to the board business meeting. It will follow policy 2410 to become amended or adopted. And then we can expect June business meeting for the board to vote on the policies. That's all I have, Commissioner Powell.
Thank you, Charisma. I'd like to welcome our board president, Cynthia Elliott, who has just joined us. So having received the overview, I'd like to take each of the 4 policies individually. Would anyone like to move the policy 4513, library selection, to out of committee and to the full board? Motion. Moved by Commissioner Patterson, second by Commissioner Malloy. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I just want clarification because I know President Elliott just walked in. Are you voting right now for the motion? So that way I know.
You talking to me?
Yes.
I'm just
So you're,
logging in, so I'm not sure. So I'll just not vote.
okay, no problem. And I'll do it manually, just if it's easier.
That's it. Okay, that takes us to this item 4C, policy 5000, student policies goals. Would anyone like to move it? Moved by
Second.
Commissioner Patterson, second by Commissioner Malloy. Any discussion, observations? I do want to thank the Student Leadership Congress for their careful look at this. This is very much in their wheelhouse, unlike most of the other policies. I really appreciate that they took this policy very seriously. If there's no other discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. Next policy is number 4220, student publications. Do I have a motion to advance it to the full board?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Patterson, second by Commissioner Malloy.
Commissioner Powell,
Yeah.
is it 4220 or 5220?
Oh, I'm sorry, I did say 42, didn't I? It is 5220.
Okay.
Any observations, concerns? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously. That takes us to, did I skip one?
Yeah,
I
5191.
did.
Yeah,
I
the-
skipped 5191, thank you. Do I have a motion to?
So moved.
Commissioner Malloy moved. Second by Commissioner Patterson. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. This takes us to agenda item 4F, presentation on the Code of Conduct, Policy 1400. Adrian, you're going to take the lead on this one?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Commissioner Powell. If okay with the board, I will present from here. I think that's fine. So is the presentation up?
It's up behind you.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. Good evening, Commissioner, Superintendent, colleagues, and school community. My name is Adrian Neal. I'm General Counsel for the district. And in conjunction with Kurzma Travis, Senior Research Analyst of the Board, we're going to present a very brief overview about the District Code of Conduct. This is primarily to lay the groundwork for the upcoming public hearing and future board discussions about potential revisions to the code. So what is a code of conduct? Education law requires that all school districts adopt and enforce a code of conduct for the maintenance of order on school property and its school functions. The code governs the conduct of students, teachers, other school personnel, and visitors. The law calls for the code to be developed in collaboration with students, teachers, administrators, parent organizations, and school safety and other school personnel. And any revisions to the code require collaboration and input from similar parties. If interested, the specific education law that directs implementation of a code is Education Law 2801, and you can also find information in the Commissioner's Regulations Part 100.2. Next slide. The code, at its essence, is really about the setting of clear expectations for behavior and the consequences for violations, and a shared accountability among all school district shareholders for those expectations. I mentioned previously that the code is about shared accountability. To that end, the Code of Conduct sets the standards and provides a framework for resolution of issues should they arise, but it also really relies not on just district administration, but students, parents, and the entire school community to be familiar with it and invested in it in order to make it work effectively. Some examples of what the Code of Conduct addresses includes a student bill of rights and responsibility that focuses on positive student behavior and a safe and supportive school climate. There are provisions that prohibit harassment, bullying, and discrimination by staff or students. There are issues such as what dress and language is appropriate and acceptable. There are procedures for reporting and determining violations of the code. There are provisions for the discipline and removal from classrooms as necessary for not just students, but for other persons who violate the code, and instances where, for example, law enforcement may have to be involved in certain activities. At the nexus of the District Code of Conduct is a belief in progressive discipline and restorative approaches. Progressive discipline aims at creating recurring learning opportunities around behavioral, moral, and ethical issues. The goal is, by doing so, we prevent recurring negative behaviors by really helping students learn from their mistakes. So in plain language, really the aim of the Code of Conduct is to start with the least punitive options whenever an issue arises and progress from there as necessary. Simultaneously, the resolutions, for certain behaviors should include restorative approaches that really seek to find out what happened, who was harmed by the behavior, what needs to be done to make things right or repair the harm, and how people can behave differently in the future. Some examples of restorative practices include facilitated circles and peer mediation. One of the most significant elements of the Code of Conduct is the behavioral matrix that lays out in a clear format the variety of interventions and the consequences to use in response to certain behaviors. The pages for the current matrix are referenced in the slide. And in my opinion, and I might have said this a couple times already, the work being done on this element of the code, while it might seem the most bureaucratic, is extremely vital and will ultimately be amongst the most important. The Rochester City School District's new Code of Conduct was adopted on June 16, 2016, and then amended on June 24, 2021. The law does call for the code to be developed in collaboration with the entire school community and stakeholders. And again, any revisions to the code require a similar collaboration. Also included in the regulatory requirement is a requirement for a yearly review and updates if necessary, which is part of why it's on the agenda this evening. And with that, I will pass it over to Ms. Charisma Travis to discuss the review process to date.
Thank you, General Counsel Neal. So the Code of Conduct Committee was appointed by the Board of Education on August 9th, 2022, so last summer, per Resolution 2022-23-13. Per the policy and resolution, this committee is comprised of students, parents, admin, community-based orgs, and members, teachers, school safety personnel, and other school staff. The Code of Conduct Committee was charged with providing the board with written recommendations on improving the school climate across the district. Once the Code of Conduct Committee completed its review, the Policy Subcommittee, chaired by Commissioner Powell, reviewed the committee's recommendations, and then it was sent to the Executive Cabinet for feedback. The Code of Conduct Committee was chaired by Madeline Frances from Citizens Action of New York and co-chaired by 12th grade student Beatrice Alma Martin. I would like to give a huge shout out and thank you to this committee for all their commitment and hard work during this process. They were very intentional and thorough with their review. And I do want to highlight the fact that our co-chair was a student. She was very engaged and even engaged her fellow peers from her school and other her friends from other schools as well. As a disclaimer, when reviewing the track change and clean copy documents of the Code of Conduct recommendations, it is highly recommended to compare the recommendations with the current Code of Conduct posted on tonight's agenda on board docs or on the district's website, as some of the changes may be color specific, especially in the matrix, reorganization, et cetera, that the track change document does not clearly display due to design of the document. And because it's a really lengthy document, it's really important that you compare, like I said, the current Code of Conduct with what's being recommended. Overall recommended changes include the gender neutral language. The SROs were removed to replace with SSOs. Restorative practice language highlighted for better flow. Reorganization of areas for better flow. Language that increases the school and parent collaboration to better help students succeed. If a language or description was updated in one location, it was updated in other areas for consistency. And then should versus shall versus must. So the following are major changes to the Code of Conduct. And so the areas of guiding principles, shared accountability, rights, responsibilities, and expectations, and prevention, intervention, and progressive discipline all had major changes. And then the biggest major change of it all are to the levels of intervention and disciplinary responses, mainly to the matrix that drives how schools respond to a student's inappropriate behavior. One of the major recommendations to the matrix is categorizing similar behaviors and having an index to quickly find an inappropriate behavior. So basically, right now, the current Code of Conduct is in alphabetical order. The recommended changes is that the Code of Conduct is broken down into 5 categories, which include academic classroom, non-academic administration, violence/DASA, drugs/substances, and legal law. So that way, things that make sense together is easier to find as well. Other major changes are to the appendices, so that include Appendix C, due process, Appendix D, student with disabilities, and Appendix F, the glossary. So for next steps in the review process, so the Rochester Board of Education is hosting the Code of Conduct public hearing on Thursday, April 27th at 5:30 p.m. prior to the board business meeting. This public hearing would take place at central office in this room we're currently in. This is an opportunity for the community to speak and or comment on the Code of Conduct. You can visit rcsdk12.org/COC public hearing for more information, including how to sign up, comment, and watch the public hearing. After the public hearing, the policy subcommittee, in collaboration with the executive cabinet, will review any recommendations from the public hearing. The Code of Conduct is slated to be presented during the June 6th Policy Committee meeting and will be asked to be forwarded out of the Policy Committee to follow the policy adoption process outlined in Policy 2410. The 3 readings that is required by Policy 2410 are slated to take place at the June 13th special meeting for consideration of resolutions following the ESA committee meeting, the June 27th Finance Committee meeting as a second reading, and then the final reading and board vote would happen at the June 29th board business meeting. Commissioner Powell, this concludes the Code of Conduct presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Charisma, for that overview. So we aren't actually going to be voting this out of committee yet. We're going to have the public hearing first, and I'll reiterate, that's April 27th. I also want to call your attention to the fact, am I wrong? Because there's no, the agenda does not include a motion to move it out of committee. I just want to call your attention to the fact that we appointed members of the committee in August of 2022. And they worked diligently to get the Code of Conduct to us in its current state. We expect to make it a real living document in our June business meeting. So you see it's taken very nearly a full year. And according to state law, we're supposed to review every year. My expectation is that we will appoint another committee, perhaps even reappointing many of the same people in August, but the real test of these changes isn't going to come to our attention until the new school year has started. So it may take a while for any real changes to percolate into 2024. It may very well be that 2024, notwithstanding a standing Code of Conduct committee and another public hearing in April of 2024, that there won't be any changes of note to offer. The real test will be what happens over the course of the 23-24 school year, and whether we've really fine-tuned this Code of Conduct to a degree where everyone can live with it. Any comments or observations about the presentation? I saw Commissioner Adams' hand first. I want to take the moment to thank Mary Adams, who has served on the committee and who in fact was one of the most passionate members of the Code of Conduct Committee when she was a board member. And I also, before I turn the floor over to Ricardo, that we do hope to have the entire committee present and receive a token of our appreciation in the form of a certificate of appreciation or some other such token, you know, as we get closer to actually approving the final Code of Conduct. So, Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just want to say how grateful I am to the young women who co-chaired the committee, Madeline Funches and Beatrix Armour Martin, as well as the others on the committee who showed up all the time and did the nitty-gritty work. I just need them to know that it's really appreciated, and I just needed to give them that shout-out. That's it.
Commissioner Commissioner Malloy. We'll just go down the line.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to the committee for the immense amount of work that was put into this. Obviously, so much thought went into it, and these are much-needed changes for our district, and they're welcomed, and I know I will be supporting them. So thank you so much for your work.
Commissioner Simmons?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I too want to acknowledge the hard work that went into this and learning more about the history of the Code of Conduct and how that came into creation, is a testament to the dedication of folks that are invested in our school district. And I do hope that, as you stated, Commissioner Powell, that this is going to become a living, breathing document and that we do develop some form of consistent measurements or ways to capture the information to ensure that school communities are aligned with the Code of Conduct so that it is operating in fidelity. But thank you.
Madam President,
Yes, thank you. Couple of things. The committee, as the committee before this one, did great work. The concern that I heard from this committee this time was the lack of it being operationalized. And so to, what my colleagues have just indicated, we've got to ensure that it is operationalized. But I personally have a concern about, I think there was some language, they were saying use the language gender neutral. Is that a state mandate? Gender neutral, that phrase?
Madam President, that was a decision that we as a board made quite a long time ago to evolve all of our policies into gender-neutral language.
I probably didn't vote on that one. Okay.
Okay.
Because I like being female, so I know I didn't vote on that one. So, all right, thank you.
Okay. Well, having already taken the prerogative of the chair and made my remarks, I want to thank everyone for, again, everyone on the committee that worked on it. I did not highlight, and I want to, the chair was actually related to a board member, Melanie Funches, who also had taken a profound interest in the Code of Conduct. And her legacy is a living, breathing legacy in the form of her own children bearing witness to her original work and advancing it to its next generation. And I think that the changes to the matrix and grouping things into a more sensible framework rather than alphabetical will have significant impact on how well it's received and how well it's implemented. So again, thank you to everyone who has put time and effort into it, not the least of which is our chief legal counsel and our board staff who have been shepherding this through since the beginning. So the next item on the agenda, item 4G, the administration has begun to present changes to the policy 5153, parent preference managed choice. Some stakeholders have already had a look at that, the SLC and the PLAC and the Bilingual Council, and I thought it was really important that the board also have an opportunity to look at it before it's done in the subcommittee stage, and essentially alert you that there's one last chance to see it in a subcommittee if you want to attend our next subcommittee meeting. Some thoughts and ideas were brought back from PLAC in particular, and so that it will get a good vet. Those comments and observations will get a good vetting at the next subcommittee meeting, and then at our next policy committee meeting, we will be actively engaged as a body of 7 to discuss it and hopefully advance it to upcoming business meetings, okay? Are there any, Mr. Superintendent, do you have a presentation on this? Do you want to speak directly to the managed choice policy at this point?
So Deputy Superintendent Turner is going to give a brief overview of what the policy outlines.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Commissioners and President Elliott, for this opportunity to give an overview of the managed choice policy. We're going to highlight some of the changes as we propose to implement this policy in the 24-25 school year. If you're looking at the track change form, you'll see that we removed the historical content and the scope and purpose from the policy. And if you look at the clean copy, to highlight some of the changes and entertain any questions that you may have. First one is that the superintendent may alter the attendance zone boundaries once a year if needed after soliciting parent input. So as you know, our current zones are northeast, northwest, and south zone. And also, we are encouraged to limit the lottery for kindergartners, 6-go-7s, and 8-go-9s to 85% of the available seat. So what that essentially means that we would hold back 15% of the seats for new incoming families so they don't get closed out a lot of the schools, which tends to happen. Also, if we go to the third point, bullet point A, this really talks about the idea that we're not going to require students to walk through unsafe boundaries like railroad tracks, 490 overpass, or the river. And if that happens, we're going to be mindful of their school choice. So if it's unsafe for them, even though the closest school might be school A, but it's unsafe for them to safely walk there and get there because of these proximity barriers, we will place them in the school in which that barrier is eliminated. Also, currently, we zone K through 6. In this new policy, we are proposing to zone also 7-8, so K through 8. Point 6 says students will be matched to their zone schools using our lottery system, which we currently do. And what we want to do is give students the option to stay in the school where they attend pre-K, as long as that school is in their zone. And then also increasing the 0.5 proximity to 0.75. This will apply for kindergartners. Again, we talk about the whole idea that being mindful that the walking preference. So again, if it's unsafe to walk due to various barriers and hazards, that students, when a school is not available within the 0.75, the closest school will be available for the student in order to give their proximity preference. And as you may know, students have the option of ranking 4 schools in their zones plus an optional citywide. And that is what point E speaks to, that we will do all that we can to accommodate students' first choices. When that's not possible, we'll go to their second, third, fourth option to try to give them those school choice as much as possible. And as I said, students will rank, even if students come to the Welcome Center, to our student placement after maybe their new arrivals or after school is started, they still have the opportunity to rank their school choice, and we will accommodate it as long as there's space in that school as part of their choice. G speaks to families who move after September will remain in their school until the end of the year, so we're trying to stop a lot of that movement. So if families move after September, they will remain in their school until the end of that school year. And one change you might notice that's sort of major is H, where no voluntary transfers will occur after September 30th. So really trying to keep students in their particular school as much as possible, so no voluntary transfers we're proposing will occur after September 30th of that school year. Students are permitted 1 voluntary transfer during a school year, and those voluntary transfer applications will be available May 1st for the following school year, and they will be processed starting July 1st granting no voluntary transfers after September 30th as proposed in this policy. And citywide schools are required to recruit students from every zone so that no student is denied access to a citywide school or program because of where he or she may live. And K, speaking to the needs of our students with disabilities, that we try to keep those specialized programs like the GEM program within a central location so that it's accessible to students who may need those services. The same thing also applies when we think about parents' choice. If a student has an individualized education plan, an IEP, that the parent of students with disabilities have the opportunity to choose the schools they believe are best suited for their child within their respected student zone. And the same thing applies to parents or guardians of English language learners. They will also have the opportunity to choose schools they believe are most educationally appropriate for their children within their respected school zones. I think those are the major highlights.
Thank you so much, Ruth. So I don't expect ever anyone to have like fully formed questions because this is, for most of you, the first time you've seen the proposed changes. But I will happily entertain like burning questions. I think I saw Commissioner Malloy's hand first, and do you have a question also, Ricardo? Okay. So starting with Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I welcome so many of these changes that I see on here. I wanted to just ask a quick question regarding point 2A under the superintendent. I'm going to assume that altering those boundaries once a year, putting that provision in, is just in case our numbers begin to change district-wide, which they are. We know we have declining enrollment, so I'm assuming that that's going to help ensure that we're able to make changes as necessary because some of our zones have more students than others. Am I correct in making that assumption?
Yes, you are correct. I think there's also some, as the demography of the district changes, right? And then we have some buildings that have been renovated and have gone through FMP, others have not. If that means that we have to adjust some things to be in line with some of the buildings that have been renovated, we may need to make some decisions there. Yep.
I think my follow-up question then for that is that if we need to change any of the boundaries, if a student no longer resides in the same boundary where they're going to school, would they be guaranteed to stay in the school that they had already been enrolled in, or would they need to switch schools? I just want to ensure that there's continuity for our students.
That's good feedback and good question. Right now, we have the policy written as if you're within your zone if you move after September 30th, right, you could stay in that zone. If you move, then you'd have to right size after that. If we ever get to a point where we're going to have to change zones, I think we could absolutely look at not disrupting kids
And
during
families.
that time. Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Let me add to that answer that there is a provision, and I can't find the exact number, but in the event that a family is up against a boundary line, if they're within walking distance, regardless of where that boundary line is, God forbid we disallow them to walk to the nearest school because it's on the wrong side of an imaginary line. So there is a provision for that, and so if the line shifts by a block or whatever, and they're still within walking distance, that wouldn't be an issue.
Thank you.
Commissioner Adams, you had a...
Couple of things here. I'm just curious as to this barriers thing. If I live near a school that has some barriers getting to it, why wouldn't we just provide transportation for them to get around the barriers? That's what I need to know, because if we're going to classify areas as barriers, I mean, we almost have to move the school out of that area. Almost. I'm just trying to get make it make sense to me. Like I live about 12 houses from number 16 school. there was barriers that kept me from sending my school kids to that school. Half of the 0.5 art teacher, 0.3 music teacher, those are barriers that I could not send my kids to that school. I don't see an explanation. And then there's neighborhoods that are really infested with, like school number 8 area. To get around these barriers, I think we're gonna probably have to offer some transportation. I really do. I know transportation is expensive and all of that, but we have to really look at some other options. Because if you send them to a different school, that's gonna require transportation. So if we're gonna use transportation, let's use transportation to send them to the school that's in the area. It's something for us to think about. The other thing is, on here it talks about no transfers after September 30th. But we know in reality, there's a lot of stuff that goes on during the year. There's nothing in here about the abnormal. There's nothing in here about the abnormal situation.
So can I?
I'm going to take that first and then, so safety transfers were in the policy. Voluntary transfers were written into policy that there would not be any taken after September 30th. That is in the existing policy. That's voluntary transfers. We do have a safety transfer process as well. Okay. I do, so there are the needs for safety and hardship transfers, and we have those reviewed as well. I will also say, when safety transfers were originally thought of and honored, we were in a different time where kids would be able to move from situations. And what we're seeing now, more often than not, is that situations are traveling with kids. Social media travels with them, communication travels with them, and it doesn't help alleviate sometimes the issues that are causing the safety transfer to begin with. And where we want to be is in the support and preventative and work of supporting those families so that they stay in a climate and culture that they're known and not transferring through without. But we still have safety and hardship transfers for those situations where we need to make some moves. It's just voluntary transfers that we're saying none after September.
Good enough answer for me.
Okay. Commissioner Simmons, your mic is on.
Yes, thank you. Just number 2, letter C, just wanted to expound on the may adjust class capacity. I do understand it's within the limitations of the bargaining agreements, but tell me more about the class capacity potentially being adjusted as needed.
So we do have stipulations within the contract on some class sizes where you could add a paraprofessional when you get over a certain amount, right? Or when you split a class for 2 grade levels. Those are some of the areas, and I think then you have some CTE classes where there may be some safety concerns where you want to limit those class sizes as well. So we're just not trying to be bound to one class size in this case.
And also to prevent unnecessary movement of students, maybe 2 or 3 students to another school and uproot them. So just to try to give them some consistency.
Okay, yeah, because my thought process was thinking about, of course, smaller classes are more successful. Okay, thank you.
So Commissioner Simmons, to add to that answer, the previous policy, the inner workings of the previous policy always allowed the superintendent to establish capacity, and which included the capability of establishing a capacity less than 100% of the contract capacity or the room capacity. And the idea was to safeguard for someone moving into the neighborhood with a kindergartner, for example. That language, it was often falling by the wayside, where people like literally forgot that they had, superintendents forgot they had that ability. And so establishing, the maximum class size, for the lottery often wasn't as seamless or as helpful, quite frankly, to parents as it could have been. So this really just clearly articulates what was always intended, but not necessarily well verbalized.
Made it explicit. Okay, thank you.
Okay? Commissioner Elliott?
So in reading the policy, I didn't get a feel that we were focused, neighborhood focused. And that being, with current concern with transportation and parents being able to get to schools, I didn't get a feel for that. So where in the policy, because I'm more of a neighborhood-based proponent, except for when there are specific programs that our students want to participate in, right? Because it's just easier and clear. Now, I understand why, back in the day, why there was choice. There were some schools that were better than other schools. But we've got to make sure that we've got all schools that are good schools so that we don't have to have, a whole neighborhood trying to get into some of those schools that are high performing. And so where in the policy, because I'm still going to focus in on neighborhood schools because of the benefit that those schools have for families. So where in the policy does it, and I'm going to say this, but where does it minimize manage, and the word manage helps me out a lot, but where in the policy can I interpret that the district is going to focus in on neighborhood schools primarily, and in some of those schools, however, we've got special programs that students may want to go to, like at Edison, to that point. So I don't get it in this policy. Am I missing something? Because I would have liked to have gotten it a little bit in this policy that we're going to be focusing in on neighborhood schools because it's for all the reasons that I've just articulated. It makes sense. Now, there's some parents who do want their children to be in other schools, but how do we get to a point where, and I'll just put it out there, that this policy is minimized, but we're focusing in on neighborhood schools? So I don't know if you'd like to add something to that, Commissioner Powell, because I know you're a champion of it, but I also understand how it's important that, our parents are able to get to schools and, especially if they are working. And so how do we balance that?
So I'll start, and obviously, Commissioner Powell has been a little bit of the resident expert on
Right.
managed choice as well. So we have increased the zone parameter to 0.75, right, to get more of a neighborhood sense on there. The other part I will say is that some of our schools are not where kids live, so we have to operate in zones, right? And so we have zones to kind of alleviate that. We're trying to get to a neighborhood model by keeping kids in zones, choose schools that are closest to them. We've increased the distance to 0.75 from which was 0.5, I believe, prior to that. So that will increase neighborhood schools, kids getting neighborhood seats, as well as remaining in zones.
And Commissioner Powell, let me just say before you interject, I know that you've emphasized in the past, the zone model. So I know you're a proponent of that, but please.
So let me give one of the clearest examples in recent years, why the 0.5 radius has just not been very effective. Some schools, School 46 comes to mind. If you have ever driven by School 46, it has a front lawn that goes on forever. So imagine how small the circle is if you put a pin at the front door of the school and draw a half-mile radius. There are not a lot of households that fit within that particular radius. So expanding it to 0.75 miles very quickly accommodates more of a neighborhood that had been just screaming for access, and it's not that they weren't getting access, but if they had to wait for the lottery to happen, if they were the .51 miles away, they had to wait for the lottery and, in order to get in. Now, in most cases, they were still able to get in if they were willing to do the waiting. The real issue there is that a lot of parents, especially in our outer ring, the schools closest to the suburbs, is there's a certain degree of suburban mentality where they just weren't willing to wait, and they were more likely to put their house on the market or enroll their child in a charter school or private school, rather than take any chances. So expanding the proximity radius, I think, is going to have a huge impact on those for whom their neighborhood school truly is a preference, right? And they'll take that option before they will, take a more extreme option of enrolling in a private school or a charter school or moving out of the city. Another change that the superintendent proposed was that in those instances where the proximity radius doesn't overlap, or where there's, if you draw a circle around every house, every school, there are going to be a few pockets where a house will be situated outside of any circle that you might draw, right? So by assigning that household proximity, granting proximity rights to the nearest school, if it's more than 0.75 miles, it's still going to be technically within walking distance according to the state. So that gives that household a place to go that they can call their home. And it's the closest school. So that's another way that the whole point of the proximity is to say, we're going to give anyone who chooses their homes, the school within their walking distance, we're going to give them essentially first right of refusal. And we can't, given the mismatch of where our children are versus where the seats are, that's about as close as we can get to a neighborhood model in the present day. And as Dr. Peluso said, we can certainly hope that someday, the demographics will shift in such a way that all schools have a better shot at being true neighborhood schools than they currently are. Commissioner Sims, I see your hand, but I want to give Commissioner Patterson an opportunity to ask his questions.
Thank you. I have two things, but I wanted to first begin with piggybacking off what the president indicated and moving toward a more neighborhood schools. And I've spoken to the superintendent relative to the three zones at this point in time. But one thing that that has been very positive is this cohort that I'm going through presently, the Student Outcomes Focused Governance cohort. And one thing that I did learn is that goals and how we set our goals, that we have to put time limits on them, a beginning and an end. So right now we're involved in the zones, the 3 zones, but at some point in time, maybe in the next go round with our goals, when we create them, we have to put an end date on when we want to go to these neighborhood schools. So we just can't leave it open-ended. That creates a problem for those who want to move toward a neighborhood school or any other goal. Let's see here. The other point is, and I want to propose a change, 3A, it says proximity preference choices will be honored except where physical barriers such as railroad tracks and the Genesee River present hazards. My thought is that it's too vague. it should include ages or grades there because, you know, and I can understand in neighborhoods that are of high violence, I totally get that. But neighborhoods where our students are walking past the river or railroad tracks, there's a certain age where you should be old enough or mature enough, better word, to be able to safely, you know, walk from your residence, you know, to that school. So what I would like to see in this area, that it include maybe an age or a grade level, because you're opening yourself up even to maybe a high school student that their parent might complain because they want their kid to go to a different school. And they could use that or utilize that as one of the reasons that they're making that request. But if we put an age limit on it or a grade limit on that specifically, I think, you know, that should solve the problem there. But I do see an issue with that 3A, that proximity preference and physical barriers. Yes.
Those are your observations? Okay.
Thank you.
Back to Commissioner Simmons.
And I also do want us to be cognizant that, you know, when we're considering age and grade as well, that, you know, we also have to consider special needs and things of that nature when we're thinking about that conversation. But I don't want to go too far in the wrong direction. I wanted to just get a pulse on where we stand around community schools. I hear us talking about neighborhood schools, which I'm a supporter of, and I understand the benefits for transportation. And again, we use the word proximity to, you know, the home or what have you. But again, if I'm thinking of myself as a parent, and I have a school across the street from my house, but the school is underperforming, and I'm not comfortable with it. I don't want the advantage. So I know we have the selection process and things of that nature within the zone, but where are we with community schools, which also responds to the resources and needs of that specific community?
Very good question. We've been having some conversations around community schools, and I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Turner to she's leading this initiative.
So we have about 17 schools that would designate themselves as official community schools, but there are aspects of it in a lot of the schools, right? Whether it's giving access to the community, whether it's having a pantry available for you know, food resources and things of that sort. So as we enter the 23-24 school year, we're really looking at that to make sure that when a school declares that they are a community school, that they follow the model, right, of community schools, and they adhere to the pillars and plan accordingly, make sure the individuals that are working to be the coordinators are doing the job that they're supposed to do. So we've looked at, as we prepare into New Year, some of the training and some of the requirements that we're asking schools that if indeed they are going to work out of this model, make sure they really understand it and that they're adhering to it, because that's where the success is going to come. So we've introduced a plan to the state monitor and ways to do that and to ensure that those folks have the proper support and training from central office to be able to do the work and to work with building leaders to really understand what their role is, and if their role is done correctly, it would help with addressing attendance, right? Making sure that families feel welcome and supported when they come to the school. And we have, as I said, there are many schools doing it very well, but we want to make sure that everybody under the umbrella is really following exactly what they're supposed to do. So we've proposed, we're meeting with school leaders in the next couple of weeks to make sure they understand what that looks like going into the 23-24 school year.
Right, and the model that you're speaking of is the true model, because I do understand, I believe at some point there were some schools maybe in receivership, for example, that went under a community school representation, but it was not the true model. And so you're talking the true model.
Right.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Dr. Jello, I see your picture is up, so maybe you've got an open mic. Do you have a question or a concern?
No, just listening tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Our other state monitor, any questions? Maybe not. Okay. I do want to speak to one of Commissioner Patterson's points about the perhaps the vagueness of what constitutes a hazard. So whether it be 490 or 390 or a very large rail yard like what you have just off of East Main Street, sometimes these barriers are so large that by the time you have taken into account the roads or pedestrian overpasses that it takes to bypass the hazard, you are now more than 3/4 of a mile away. Someone could be directly across the river from one of our, say, the school number 10, and depending on how close their home is to the nearest bridge, that the river may become such a significant obstacle to, as the car drives, that the school number 10, for instance, at Congress Avenue, is no longer within a 0.75 mile radius of that child's home. So perhaps we can modify the language to speak about how the 0.75 mile radius is as the car drives or as the child walks on proper pedestrian pathways, because those are almost always, the conflict is almost always also in terms of just the way that you can cross a river or cross a railroad or 490. So sometimes those hazards are synchronous with the fact that there is no short path by car or on foot to get to the school, even if as the crow flies, it might be within 0.75 miles. By the time you've boxed around the hazard, it's out of reach. Maybe we can speak more clearly to that issue in the paragraph that you've isolated, Commissioner Patterson.
Yeah, I'll just wait, to see your recommendations, and I'll review it, get to that point. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? The zones, so we're streamlining the zones or what have you, and we're assuming that this may release some of the transportation concern. Do we have a number on that? Like how much money we potentially are saving as a result of this zone piece, or a ballpark, I would say, not a precise figure, but.
We can get you a ballpark of it, right? I think what we have to do is decide, pull everyone out of their schools, zone them, then transportation route them, and see where the savings is, right?
Yeah.
I think there's, more importantly, a capacity savings here, right? Versus we're struggling with drivers, we're struggling to across everywhere, right? It gives us a more efficient way to deliver transportation than versus having, if you take a look at our scatter plots, schools that students over by the lake go to schools in the south, and they're hitting multiple schools, and we just need to streamline our capacity. So as much as there may be savings, there's capacity building in this as well.
Yeah, I would definitely want the the savings, but not at the sake of we're saving money, but people are now being challenged. So, but I would love to hear where we land with that. Yeah.
So Commissioner Simmons, on that point, many years ago, studies were done, I think it was under Jerome Underwood, and where we found that the typical bus route that goes across zone boundaries has half as many students in it as a bus that's transporting students within the zone. And that's because the route gets so long that we can't put any more make any more stops and still get the bus to the school on time. Yeah. That's that. Right. Right. Right.
Those areas, but I want to know those costs.
Right, but you can see intuitively, you can tell that if every bus is closer to full by doing it within the zone, then obviously we can save a bunch of money.
Yeah,
right?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Again, this was mostly just to familiarize. If we want to go deep, I encourage you to come to our subcommittee meeting, which is scheduled for when, Charisma?
Next Wednesday, the 19th at 4 p.m. on Zoom.
Not tomorrow, but
The following
a week
Wednesday.
from tomorrow.
Yes, yes, and I can
And,
send out the Zoom information for any
right.
commissioners that are interested.
Commissioner Malloy, you have a question?
Well, it's just about upcoming potential unfinished business or policy.
Say again?
I just had a question about whether or not we are going to be discussing at any point in the future policies around school safety.
Yeah, anything that we haven't already passed. There are a bunch of policies that are out of sync that should have moved with their with a bundle. And if there were any complications that required a more careful look at the language of it, where somebody objected to the language, we pulled it out, set it aside, and had it to have a more in-depth conversation. So if we haven't already passed the policy, it is going to happen. I can't tell you exactly when. It depends on how difficult how natty the problem is that has to be untangled.
And is that something that we can, I guess I'm asking Dr. Peluso on this too, is this an upcoming topic of discussion pretty soon?
So we could add it as a topic of discussion, absolutely. In terms of policy, we could look at where we are in the process of that to see when it could come up to our committee.
And there is work being done with regard to issues of safety, so just know that we're working on that, and that'll be forthcoming as well. I know the question is different from what you just asked with regard to policy, but there is work being done.
And I would just add, some policies have all gone through review this year. For example, I think the Safe Schools Policy 8135 was adopted in March of 2020, was last updated just last month. So there have been some safety policies that have worked their way through the cycle.
So if there's a particular concern that you have, you want to read through the policies we have and channel your particular concerns so that we can re-engage on
Yeah,
that if need be.
absolutely.
But the first order of business is to get through every policy once and then re-engage on those that come up after that.
Thank you.
And we're getting to that point very quickly where we're really tying up loose ends at this point, and we're very close to being able to say the door's open for, folks to bring concerns about existing policy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Okay, I don't think there's anything else on the agenda. Any other questions on this policy? No? Okay, so I'm really glad we had a shorter agenda so that we'd have a chance to talk about the managed choice policy a little bit longer than we might otherwise. I appreciate everyone's engagement on this topic, and the next item on the agenda is 6A, the completion of our survey. So if folks could open the survey and work their way through it, I will entertain a motion to adjourn in the meantime.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Malloy and Commissioner Simmons. Oh, and I didn't announce your arrival. I apologize, Commissioner Simmons. I know that we were in the middle of a presentation when you arrived, and I appreciate
That
your
is more than
coming.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And please finish the survey before we pack up and leave, okay? Thanks.